Welcome to today's webinar on Guide to Auditing and Logging in the Oracle eBusiness Suite. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Integrigy, and I'll be the moderator for this e-learning session. We have two speakers today. First is Stephen Coast. Steve is the Chief Technology Officer and the founder of Integrigy. He's been working with Oracle products since 1994 with responsibilities that include database administrator, technical architect, IT security auditor, and applications administrator. For the past 14 years, Steve has focused on the security and auditing aspects of the Oracle Business Suite and Oracle Database, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences, including OEUG, IOUG, and the National Collaborative Conference. Along with Steve today, we also have Mike Miller. Mike is the Vice President of Integrigy and is responsible for Integrigy's security assessment services. He's a 20-year veteran of enterprise applications, and he holds security certificates such as the CISSP. I'll now turn it over to Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. Today's topic is going to be auditing and logging in the Oracle eBusiness Suite. And the foundation of this presentation was a white paper that we first developed back in March of actually 2003. And that white paper became the foundation for all the auditing and logging recommendations in Oracle's best practices for securing the Oracle eBusiness Suite, which later became the Secure Configuration Guide for the Oracle eBusiness Suite. So what we've done recently is actually updated the paper, and it was being updated slowly over a number of years, but in this month we actually did a major rewrite of the entire paper and really focused in on what you need to look at when you're trying to do auditing and logging in the Oracle eBusiness Suite. The Oracle eBusiness Suite is a fairly complex application. There's a database, application server, application, lots of different things going on, lots of different ways to audit and log it. And so what we're going to do today is walk through a framework that we've developed based on our last 10 years of working with different clients on how to do auditing and logging. And we're going to take you through that framework, and then after the presentation you'll actually be able to download, and we'll send you an email with information about how to access the white paper that we recently updated. So let's get started. So we're going to start out with a little bit of overview of auditing and logging, kind of how we developed our framework. And we'll specifically talk about the Oracle eBusiness Suite auditing and logging capabilities. And then the rest of the presentation, and Mike will actually go into in great detail, looking at a three-level model of how to actually do logging and auditing in the Oracle eBusiness Suite, starting from a fairly basic level, going to a very mature level of logging and auditing. Before we jump into auditing and logging too much, for those of you on the call today not familiar with Integrigy, we were founded in 2001, and we specialize in Oracle eBusiness Suite security. Now, there's two sides to Integrigy. We do have a product side that actually develops two different products. One is AppSentry, which is a security auditing tool for the eBusiness Suite. So some of the things that we're talking about today on the call on what you should be setting up, AppSentry can actually check that for you. And we'll actually go through and check if you've got default passwords, missing security patches, those type of things. And then we also developed a product after we did AppSentry called AppDefend. And if you're running Oracle eBusiness Suite on the internet, there's a lot of security issues within the application, and AppDefend helps provide an application firewall to protect some of those issues. It provides virtual patching, so if you're not applying critical patch updates quickly, we actually release the rules for AppDefend within a week of the CPU release, so you can actually virtually patch those type of security bugs without having to apply the security patches from Oracle. And then the other side of the business is our services business, where a lot of this presentation today comes from, working actually with clients on their security issues and how they address them. We work with SOX, PCI, HIPAA, do on-site security assessments, do long-term design services. So if you want to know how to audit and need help setting that up, we can help you with that. So enough about Integrigy. That's just a brief background to tell you where we're coming from. The rest of this presentation will be educational. We'll kind of walk through and talk about auditing and logging in the eBusiness Suite. So we'll first start with an overview and talk about some of the issues and what you need to be thinking about and how we developed our framework. Starting off looking at auditing and logging in the eBusiness Suite, it's a fairly complex process. We're not only talking about capturing the information, but we're also looking at monitoring and alerting. These are kind of separate disciplines. The easy part is capturing it. When you kind of walk through and talk about what level of effort is required, maybe 5% of the effort is actually capturing it. 95% of the effort is actually what do you do with it once you've captured it. Second, a lot of the requirements are coming from different areas in the organization. So the DBAs might have some requirements, your internal audit department might have requirements, your IT security department might have requirements, compliance requirements. So you have to really take all these different requirements and meld them into a comprehensive auditing and logging strategy. And finally, the e-business suite and the database provide some very powerful capabilities natively. You can also buy a number of third-party products, but what we see is a lot of organizations don't even take advantage of the native capabilities. What can you do easily and quickly, turn it on, get some value, get some feedback, hopefully identify security issues, identify and resolve compliance issues earlier than having an audit do it. So what we did at Integrigy was we've been working with a lot of different clients over the years, and they've tried to tackle this problem. And so what we've done is developed a framework for auditing and logging within the Oracle E-Business Suite. And that framework is based off a lot of the compliance and regulatory requirements and security requirements that you might have. And we picked off kind of the key ones: payment card industry security standard, SOX, we mapped that back to COBIT, HIPAA, a lot of Oracle E-Business Suite customers are running into HIPAA issues now, FISMA for the federal government, and IT security in general. So do you have strong IT general controls? And we took all those compliance requirements and IT security requirements and kind of developed a foundation set of security events and actions. What are the key things happening in your environment that you need to be thinking about? And those are typically log-offs, logins, account creation, granting of privileges, those type of things, changing of critical configuration settings. Then for each layer of the technology stack, we actually map those different security events that we want to capture. So think about a login. Well, I have logins both at the database as a database account, but I also have logins at the e-business suite layer. So I've got application accounts coming in. So when I talk about logins, I need to capture those at two different layers of the technology stack. Oh, by the way, those are different ways to capture those. So we went through and looked at the database, the e-business suite. What are the different functionalities and capabilities natively within these technology stack layers that we can capture this? And then we look at how do you actually protect that audit trail, how do you alert and monitor, how do you report on it. Then when you're doing more advanced things like correlation, saying, well, if something happens at the e-business suite and something happens at the database, can I correlate those events to say, well, someone might be attacking me because they did one invalid login at the database level, but then they did a couple invalid logins at the application level. So they're kind of poking around my environment. Can I try to catch those things? And really you need some sort of centralized logging solution in order to do that. And we'll kind of talk about that as we go along in the presentation today. So when we talk about foundation security events, we went through and hopefully did some of the heavy lifting for you. This won't be a complete list. This is not every possible event that you can audit, and it'll vary by organizations. But we went through and said, okay, what are some of the key events? When you start out, what should you be looking at? And so we came up with 14 different categories. And throughout the presentation, we'll actually identify them E1 through E14. So it's very consistent. So whenever we talk about logins, we'll always call that an E1 event. And so we hopefully spent the time and effort to go through and map out what you need to do. And then what we've done is taken these security events and actually mapped them back to some of the compliance requirements. So PCI is probably the most rigorous here in terms of requirements. So we've actually very clearly mapped it back and said, okay, when we talk about logins, PCI specifically says you have to capture all logins. And so then we kind of take that to the next layer and look at it at the business suite and the database levels. So we've hopefully done some of the pre-work for you to walk through, and all this is documented in the white paper that we've released and updated recently to kind of walk you through and say, okay, this is what you should be looking at and why you should be looking at it. And the key part here is why you should be looking at it. And some of these issues might be because you're trying to identify security incidents. That's kind of the primary reason. You want to identify someone trying to attack your environment, something going wrong. And then the second requirement is really compliance related. So if I capture all creation of user accounts, that's the event. I'm capturing a user creation event. But that's actually going to help one of my SOX controls most likely. Most organizations have a SOX control around, okay, who's creating users. That's probably at the database level and the e-business suite level. So I actually am now capturing the information, and now I can use that to help automate my compliance requirement in terms of SOX. So all this kind of maps together, and it's kind of a framework, and that's why we're working it as a framework, because we're trying to take you from the start to the end and make sure that everything's covered and covered appropriately. And we understand that not everybody can implement all auditing and logging at once. So what we did in our framework was actually do level 1, 2, and 3 to say, well, I know you can't start right away and turn on every audit, get everything going, immediately enable every alert, get everything perfect. So what we did was we actually mapped it out and said, okay, if you're going to start out today, you have nothing, what should you be doing in level 1? What's a baseline auditing? Well, I probably don't have a centralized logging solution in level 1 that I can use, so at least I'll capture it to the database. I might be doing Oracle alerts to do some alerting off of it. I don't have anything really sophisticated, but at least I know when there's too many invalid logins or someone's trying to attack my database by going against some of the standard database accounts that should always be locked. Level 2 now starts talking about doing a centralized logging solution, getting the data out of the Oracle E-Business Suite environment into a protected place where there's more sophisticated alerting and monitoring capabilities and potentially correlation. And hopefully I'm now pulling my operating system logs in, my network logs, and I can start seeing what's happening in my environment. And then finally, level 3 is functional logging. Now that I've kind of got the base security logging, I know what's going on in the application, what's going on in my modules? Are people changing general ledger setups and things like that? So this is kind of the maturity model and how we mapped it out. And there's a few different maturity models out there. So there's the common maturity model. And so there's an organization mapped that to logging. And so then we've mapped our framework to the CMM to kind of give you an idea. So the maturity model level 0 is you're not doing anything. And then it kind of goes up. So the goal is to be, at the end of the day, a continuous improvement. So you're always monitoring. You're always alerting about what's going on. So you know exactly what's happening in your environment. And this is kind of how our framework levels map to CMM. For an auditor, may like this slide, but kind of for an DBA, this is kind of just nice to know information, but not very useful. And when we're talking about centralized logging, we're really talking about some sort of commercial or open source solution that you can now start putting the logs in. And the reason a centralized logging solution is important in what we're talking about here is we're not talking about a single log. We're not talking about a single database capture. We're talking about 3 or 4 different ways that you can capture this information. Some of it may be in tables. Some of it may be going out through syslog. Some of it may be just an actual flat file like the listener log. There's a lot of different places that there's logging and auditing within the Oracle E-Business Suite. And if you're looking at just one spot saying, well, I'm just going to use database auditing, well, that's not enough because then you're not capturing all account logins. You need to have a full view of what's happening in the entire application technology stack to identify security issues and meet compliance requirements. And we'll get more into the actual details, but this is kind of just a high-level diagram to show kind of the foundation, the application layers, and what we're talking about here in terms of auditing different pieces. This is not just one little piece that we're auditing, pulling off maybe database sessions. Well, you have to look at database sessions, but also when you do application sessions, those are stored in a separate table, so you actually have to account for that. And so as we talk about log management, we're talking about capturing that information, sending it off to a centralized logging server, doing correlation. Now then, when you're really starting to get advanced on maturity scale, starting to do some anomaly detection. So what's going wrong in the environment? What's different? What users are all of a sudden logging in that shouldn't be logging in, and things like that. Or across different parts of the technology stack. So am I getting invalid logins at the application layer versus at the database layer? If someone's trying to attack you, they may be going in, trying the database, they can't get in, what are they going to do next? They're going to try to log into the application, things like that. So this is all working together, and that the key reason is we're describing as a framework is there's a lot of different moving pieces, and we're trying to go all the way from capturing log information at many different parts of the technology stack to actually alerting and reporting on across those different logs that may be in a file, maybe in a syslog, maybe in a database table. So that's kind of an overview, kind of a background about the framework, about what we're trying to propose here and what's kind of detailed out in the white paper. I'll go back one step now. Well, let's talk about some of the Oracle E-Business Suite logging and auditing capabilities. And because this is kind of a foundation of the framework, because we're looking at different components to log and audit. The log and audit is not stored in one spot. There's not one master here. There's many different points. So if we look at just the database, this isn't the E-Business Suite even, this is just at the database, we really identify 5 major different points where you have logs and audits that have security and compliance relevant information. Starting at the database listener. So when people are connecting to the Oracle database, there's a listener log. So every connection coming in is logged. there's some key security events that are captured in that log that you want to know. It's also capturing IP address of who's connecting to the database. So that information is useful. That information goes out to the listener log. That's a flat file. The next one is the database alert log. The database alert log contains information about when the database starts up, stops, certain internal errors that can be indicative of a security attack. That, again, is going out to a log file on the operating system. You may want to be auditing your privileged user. So Oracle has the audit sys operations capability. That is able to audit the sys user, what's happening when the DBAs are going in, what commands and statements are they issuing to the database. That information can either go to a set of files, or it actually can go out to syslog that then you can capture in your centralized logging solution. Number 4 is the standard database auditing. This is the one that probably most people are thinking about. Well, that's kind of the auditing. Well, that's a big one, but there are other ones in here. So you can also send that audit trail either to a database table, $, or you can actually send it to the operating system, or, and what we're recommending here, which becomes very decent performance on the auditing side, you can send it off via syslog and then send it right into a centralized logging solution. And then finally, fine-grained auditing is even another way to do auditing. Standard database auditing lets you say, okay, everything that the apps user I'm going to audit, or everything that a certain user, or every time someone accesses a table. Fine-grained auditing allows you to do very detailed auditing. So you can maybe look at if someone is connecting certain hours of the day, or if they're trying to do a transaction to a table that's over $10,000. Those capabilities are all enabled in fine-grained auditing. And again, fine-grained auditing is a separate table of auditing, or you can actually send it out also to the operating system. So as you can see, at the database layer, there's 5 different types of auditing going to different locations. Now, when we start talking about the application has a bunch of different ways that they do auditing and tracking of information. The first key one is the Oracle E-Business Suite Who columns. So every single, or almost every row within the Oracle E-Business Suite database has a Who column. So that's basically creation date and last update information. So you know when a record was created, you know when it was last updated. What you're losing here, though, and why you need to potentially do additional auditing, is there's nothing in between. So if I change this user, the user ID is 1111, if I change this user 20 different times, the only thing that's ever captured here is when I created them and when I last updated them. All those changes in between and what actually was changed is lost. So the Who columns provide some interesting information. It's useful, but it only gives you creation and last updated. So you need to be looking at doing additional auditing and logging to say, okay, well, every single time something changes, I want to know, such as profile option values. That's always a very interesting one. One of our key recommendations is always put an audit on profile option values, because the first thing that happens if something goes wrong, somebody changes the profile option value to see if, oh, was that the problem? And then they change it back, and it's changed 2 or 3 times, and you have no idea what the original value was, how it was changed, and things like that. So that's why additional auditing is much important compared to the Who columns. So now when we start talking about the audit that we're going to start using the framework, then the first piece is the sign-on audit. So if you log into the database, there's a database session. Well, if you log into the application, there's also going to be an application session, and that's now captured in a different table called F&D logins. And the sign-on audit is a system profile option. You can actually set it to user, responsibility, or form. And it's incremental. So if you set it to user, it'll audit users. If you set it to responsibility, it'll actually audit responsibilities and users. And if you set it to forms, it'll do forms, responsibilities, and users. So it's cumulative on the effect going from top to bottom. So, but again, this information is stored in different tables. And so now you have to be able to access this information. So if you want a robust audit, well, if the DBAs want to hide that they were able to do a login to a different user account, that's in F&D logins. The DBAs can easily go in and delete that information. So now you have to potentially have a different solution to get that information out of the database into a centralized reporting solution so you can protect it. One of the keys on the sign-on audit form is that's only for the professional forms. You also probably have a lot of pages that are web pages and HTML pages. So within the Oracle E-Business Suite, there's professional forms and there's self-service web forms. Well, the self-service web forms are different tracking capabilities. So you have to actually now enable page access tracking to to have an audit trail of who's accessing what web and HTML pages. And again, this is now going to a different set of tables. So as you can see, there's a lot of different information being captured in the eBusiness Suite, and it's powerful capabilities, but it's going to different locations, and now you have to start melding all this information together. Just to get who's doing what, who's signing on to the application, there's two different sets of tables. And then finally, the one that most people are probably familiar with is Oracle eBusiness Suite has a whole auditing capability within it. So it's called EBS Audit Trail. And you actually go through the application and you can determine any application table that you want to audit. So if you want to audit insert updates and deletes to standard Oracle eBusiness Suite tables, you enable Audit Trail. And what Audit Trail does is it puts a trigger on the base table. So in this case, let's say we want to audit FND user. We go through the application, we actually set up Audit Trail, and we pick FND user, we pick which columns we want to change. In this example, let's say we want to have email address. So every time someone changes an email address on a user, it'll actually capture that information. So what you then do is run a concurrent program, and it sets all this up behind the scenes. And so then anytime someone goes in and updates FND user table through the forms directly, it'll actually fire the trigger and then capture the information in a shadow table. So the shadow tables are _A, and then in this example you can see there's two records. The original record was who created it, has M. Miller as the email address, but then all of a sudden there's a second record that says, hey, someone changed that first record and they changed the email to badguy@yahoo.com. So that's, again, another powerful, but as you can see, every time I do a table, it doesn't go to a central location. It creates a shadow table, so every time I want an audit on a table, I've actually got a second table. The advantage of the Oracle EBS Audit Trail compared to the native database auditing is this provides you more information. It provides some of the translations for who created records and things. So the triggers are a better audit trail, because if you just use the standard Oracle database audit trail, you get just referential integrity. You don't know really what changed in a row. You lose a lot of information in that audit. So this becomes a much more powerful audit, but again, it doesn't go to central location. Every single time you audit a table, you're going to have a separate table. That's a separate shadow table. So there's a lot of capabilities within the database in the eBusiness Suite. Unfortunately, they're scattered throughout the application, throughout the database, and there's different layers of it. So now we have to bring all this together, and what we're going to do now is take the framework and look at it and say, okay, here's the events we want to audit, here's the technologies that we just walked through, how are we going to meld all this together into a comprehensive framework that captures both the security and the compliance information we need. And there's a couple other audits. So if you do unsuccessful logins, there's actually then another two tables that actually have the unsuccessful logins. If you want to capture concurrent requests, there's a couple other tables that capture concurrent request information. So again, just more and more tables that you have to be auditing and looking at if you want a complete picture of everything going on in the eBusiness Suite environment. So now I'll turn it over to Mike, and Mike will actually walk us through the technical details and walk through level 1, 2, and 3 and kind of describe the framework and look and talk about what we're going to audit.
Thank you, Steve. So I want to take about 10 minutes here or so to go through the framework as far as how to get started. And I'll pick up where Steve left off as far as the overview there of the tools, so to speak, on the table. And I'm going to show you how you can put those together to get started. We do have a lot of questions that we want to get to, and I'm also going to make the assumption that if you're really getting into this, that you will be using our white paper to guide you. So as far as level 1 here, what we want to do is get you started. So whether or not you are doing minimal auditing or logging today, or you just want to get started, period, we want to set you up, and we want to give you a vision and a direction, as well as some specific steps here. So underlying this, the assumption is that we're going to give you tools that are out of the box as far as standard Oracle eBusiness Suite functionality. So the objectives get you started, and we're going to build on what you have or get you started. The task laid out here, three basic steps. The sys operations and the standard auditing at the database level. We're going to have a slide on this next, but we're going to enable those. Per our recommendations, those recommendations are specific to the 14 events that Steve identified earlier. Next, we're going to enable the Oracle eBusiness Suite. I'm going to say navigation and audit trail. So we want to know where in the eBusiness Suite your users went and what did they do on some key tables. And then last, we're going to make some recommendations on specifically some alerts that we believe you need to support that compliance matrix. So step one, level one, we start with the database. So again, the white paper has the full table here, but what we wanted to do in this slide here is give you an idea for what we're talking about as far as specific Oracle standard audit events. We're talking about the creation of a user, a database user, the altering of a user, dropping of a user, creation of links, very specific database objects in events, and we have mapped these back to those 14 universal events. We're also recommending that you set up the auditing at this level to point to the sys-aud dollar table. So what we're recommending is that with the standard auditing that you're routing this to the database itself. It's only level 2, which we're going to get to next, where we're going to redirect that or pivot, so to speak, to the centralized logging facility. Last but not least here, and this will underscore every one of these audit and log capabilities we've talked about, there is a purge, corresponding purge task that needs to be done. And that purge, the amount of time that you're retaining this log data, needs to be per your organizational policies. Moving on to the database, or moving up into the database, so Steve walked you through the sign-on, audit, and then page access tracking. This is where your users went in the application. First thing we're recommending is to set that sign-on audit to the lowest level, the form. I want to know how many seconds each user spent on what professional form. Because sign-on audit only tracks professional forms activity, we're also recommending that you enable the page access tracking and set that at the lowest level that we put in bold there, session info, cookies, and all parameters. And we're recommending that at least in level 2 that you're going to track the end user navigation within specific applications, that being system administration, Oracle Applications Manager, and Application Object Library. These are those applications that define the Oracle eBusiness Suite, or certainly the security constructs. In level 3, we'll expand this. So what we're recommending here, level 1, is track where your end users are going. Next, auditing. So we have on this table here, we have on the left a mapping to the events, the universal events within our framework, and then on the right, what you see are the tables that support that. So what we're recommending is to turn on auditing on specific columns on these tables. We're not recommending that you audit each and every single column in each one of these tables, but the white paper gets into it a little bit more detail, specific columns. These tables I would describe as a low velocity change, but a high security impact. It should be on a, you're not defining new responsibilities on a daily basis or on an hourly basis, new responsibilities, new menus. These are events that don't happen all that often, but when they do, they need to be mapped back to the framework. So level 1 here, once you have pulled the levers, so to speak, and enabled that functionality, setting up the auditing for where in the application your users went, and what did they do when they got onto some specific high impact forms. The framework here lays out some alerts, The assumption with the framework here, again, level 1 standard functionality, is that you would be using the tools out of the box. For example, we've seen customers very successful with Oracle alerts. So an E1 event, you can see here a direct database logon, a successful or unsuccessful to one of the schema accounts. This would be potentially somebody trying to get into the HR schema by trying to log on with the password of HR, potentially one of the defaults, as well as on up into somebody trying to, let's say, trying to break into the sysadmin account. That unsuccessful logon attempts, E3 there as far as the universal event. If I try to get maybe whatever the clipping level that you decide at, 3 or 4 or maybe even 2 attempts, that's something that you're going to want to know about. Specific on the right there, you can see that once you've enabled this auditing, one of the first and foremost things that you want to do is make sure that that doesn't get turned off. So you need to turn on the alerts for that. You want to know that if the sign-on audit gets turned off or if the audit trail gets turned off. So we're recommending that in level 1, this is a basic starting point, that once you've enabled and starting to log, here are some things you need to do to support that framework to map back to the SOX and the PCI requirements. And again, just the last comment on this, this is probably easily done all within Oracle alerts as far as what we've seen customers do. So we're transitioning here to level 2. Though you might be doing something or everything in level 1 there, we still recommend that you at least review that. Everyone potentially could be in a different point, but we've laid out the framework logically starting with the thought process in level 1 and then moving on to level 2 here. So for level 2, the objectives here is really in and around the centralized logging. What it is that if you think about it, we have the Oracle e-business suite as the ERP platform, and as people and processes, will use many different technologies and applications. The e-business suite as the ERP platform is that cornerstone, right? So there's some very important things that we need to think about. As far as one of the first things we're going to want to do is pass all that navigation information into the centralized logging facility. I'll develop that thought a little bit in a moment. But the task here, we're going to pivot, so to speak, and all those logs that we set up in level 1, and instead of pointing to the database itself, we're going to redirect and pivot all that log activity to the centralized logging solution. We're also going to transition all of those alerts that I just spoke to, and we're going to recreate those inside of the centralized logging facility, because in level 3 we're going to build on this. And just again, as Steve mentioned, whether or not there's if you already have a logging solution, or if you're considering them, there's a lot of open source and commercial out there in the market. The white paper talks about a few different examples. So redirecting the database logs, we are pivoting from the database itself. So instead of looking into the sys odd dollar table, the recommendation for level 2 of our framework is to start formatting the database logs in the syslog file format, and then to write those out to the operating system such that tools such as ArcSight or Splunk can pick those up. Many of these tools have native parsers, not only for syslog, but some of them even for Oracle file formats. So database level, moving up, this is the navigation activity, right? This is where the end users are going inside of the Oracle eBusiness Suite, these 47,000 forms. Where did they go? So the recommendation here is to point at these tables, and through the central logging solution, all these solutions, or many of the, we'll say the major ones, have the ability not only to read a file within the operating system, but also fire SQL, such that once you set up that database connector, what you can do is have a polling, and be that once an hour or once a day, to actually throw SQL against these tables and pull that into the centralized logging facility. We're going to build on this, but you can see how this is the critical foundation as far as I have a user, did the user log on, when they logged on, where did they go? Or unsuccessfully, who's trying to, let's say, bang down the front door. So what we're doing with this table here is giving you those tables, at least that you can start thinking about how to wrap a SQL statement around for inclusion in a database connection for your central logging tool. Level 2 recommended alerts, and again, where we're picking up here is that those alerts that we map to the universal framework there in level 1, that those have all been converted, let's say from Oracle alerts into the central logging alerts. And then we're going to extend that, and we're going to start thinking about not only vertical, but also we'll use the term horizontal unsuccessful logon attempts, such that if I start seeing that not just that, let's say, Mike Miller's account was 5 attempts, somebody was trying to break into it, but let's say I have somebody trying to break into 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or maybe 20 different end user attempts trying to go through generic passwords, right? So this is the type of activity that I can start using the purpose-built functionality that come out native with these central logging tools. I can also extend this out, that I can start looking at much more sophisticated alerting, whether or not monitoring at a database alert level for different indicators of database attacks. Our white paper touches on that. But also being able to correlate into the ability to take a look at activities inside the eBusiness Suite to activity potentially outside the eBusiness Suite. So just as a summary here, level 1, we laid out which specific levers you need to pull, so to speak, to start generating the log information, and then some basic alerts to work with that. Level 2, we're pivoting all of that information, and we're looking and passing, feeding all of that into the centralized logging tool itself. And now for level 3, what we're seeking as our objective in level 3 is the extension of the functional information. So go back to the Oracle eBusiness Suite is really that cornerstone of organizational business processes. And what we want to do now is really leverage that centralized logging tool for what it was really built to do as far as correlation, identifying of anomalies, and alerting, such that we're going to highlight at least some specific additional logs that need to be passed in, and then we're going to build out some EBS functional setups. I will touch on GRC because that's a relevant discussion point here in a moment. And then last, we have some additional alerts that we're going to be recommending. So, very important to complete the picture here as far as who is connecting from where and when. In level 1 and level 2, we talked about those navigation logs. What we're recommending here is to complete the picture, so to speak, by pulling in the Apache logs and the database and listener logs, such that we can really triangulate in on IP addresses, who's connecting, where, and I can start with some alerts, and I'll get to those in a moment. At the eBusiness Suite level here, we are recommending level 3 here to extend that page access tracking to a lower level to include, let's say, those applications and or keyed users appropriate to your implementation. If you're processing credit cards, you potentially will want to, or not potentially, you will want to monitor the IBY system setups at a table level, as well as at the payment setup responsibilities. So if somebody is moving through the payments setup responsibility, there's probably no, there's probably few reasons that people need to be moving through those credit card encryption forms on a regular basis. That might be something that you want to just alert. It might be something that you want to capture and report on. But the idea is that per your implementation, the modules that you're using, you're going to go deeper with the page access tracking. I mentioned GRC. So government risk and compliance applications. This is a complementary effort to what we're laying out here. The thought process behind our framework here, those 14 universal events, we're tying those back to specific compliance requirements with regard to PCI or HIPAA. Or SOX. GRC here is getting into the controls as far as, for example, can I both create a vendor and pay a vendor, right? If you have a GRC implementation, this should be complementary. If you don't have a GRC implementation, there's some things you can go towards that. But what the point here is that what we're laying out for GRC is that this is, we're not recommending that this could replace a GRC implementation. So, kind of in a summary here, level 3 is continuous. If you remember Steve's common maturity model there, the idea that the possibilities for correlation and detection of anomalies is really limited only to that data that's been generated by the eBusiness Suite, overlaid by that which is also being fed into the centralized logging facility, such that I can start considering whether or not I have a successful or unsuccessful log on to the Oracle eBusiness Suite, and I can start comparing to, hey, wait a minute, did Mike Miller also log on to the network? Did he actually swipe his key pass at the door this morning, right? And such that might be an anomaly that, hey, wait a minute, if Mike Miller's not in the building, he shouldn't be able to log on to the Oracle eBusiness Suite. But the idea is that whatever you're looking at, there is a baseline of expected activity. You then define out the correlations, build the alerts and reports appropriate for that, look for the anomalies, and then as your business processes change, you rebaseline and adjust. And so this is a continuous process. Gets into the concept of many of you, certainly in the internal audit, whether or not it's the concept of continuous audit or continuous monitoring. This is really why you've invested the time and the energy to consider and or implement that centralized logging tool itself. It's the idea of the automated compliance or the continuous audit, and pulling in this cornerstone of activity, which is the the eBusiness Suite, and being able to align that out to other events. So I foreshadowed this a little bit on the prior slide there, but with the framework here, this is more demonstrative as far as mapping things such as the sysadmin usage pattern or those tables that we recommended that you turn on auditing. You will want to potentially incorporate those into correlation and anomaly detection. And we've mapped those all out here. Again, is really just something to at least help you see what is possible in order to get you going. So I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Steve. And please ask questions. We have a lot of questions coming up here as well.
Thanks so much, Mike. And to go back to the whole point of this presentation was kind of outlining what we've done in the white paper, which has a significant amount more detail. That will be available in the next day or so up on our website. We're actually just got a final draft of it right now, and we'll be putting it up. It basically was a complete rewrite from our original paper, and that will also be included in a link that we always send out a thank you note after the webinars. So we'll include the link to the white paper directly also. So we'll turn it over to Phil and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, we got quite a few questions here, in fact. The first one being, is there any truth to the claim that turning on auditing/logging significantly impacts performance?
And you can answer this a couple different ways. So if you turn on too much auditing and logging, you will cause a performance problem. So whenever you look at auditing and logging, you always have to be very careful about what you're doing. The recommendations we have in the framework we've developed was specifically looking at security events and non-transactional events. So anything that we're looking to audit or log, probably the biggest item would be logins and logoffs, because you're not creating that many users, you're not granting that many permissions. But in terms of logins, logoffs, access to different forms, that generates some traffic, but really it's not significant. It's not going to cause much of a performance overhead. What you really need to avoid when you're doing any auditing and logging is looking at a transactional table. So you might be doing orders, and so firing multiple triggers per every single order you do and trying to audit that will create a substantial amount of overhead. So the answer quickly is you have to be very careful and design out what you're trying to audit, why you're auditing it, and be very careful. But in terms of just turning on most of these audits that we're recommending here, there's very low performance overhead. We have never had a client come back to us and complain, say, oh yeah, this is too much. But typically as soon as they start doing this, they start turning on more and more and more, and you do have to ratchet it back, but as long as you're not doing transactional tables, we've never really seen a problem. Oracle auditing is very good performance. We recommend piping it out to syslog versus storing it in the database, because that's kind of the level 1, 2, and 3. As you get more mature, you can now send it out via syslog, which eliminates any duplicate writes to the database. So you don't have that overhead. You send it right to syslog. It gets stored in memory and then immediately sent out as a network transaction. So we haven't had any problems, and as long as you avoid certain types of transactions, there should not be a performance issue.
Next question. Any notable differences between 11i and R12?
In terms of everything that we've talked about today, not significant. The white paper is based off of 12.1, and the only, I don't know if Mike might have any thoughts on that, just a couple very minor differences, like in page access tracking was a little bit more robust than 11i because it actually could capture the IP address, and R12 it doesn't regularly. But besides that, there's most of this technology is kind of core standard in the application, and is moving forward. Some of the changes that happened underlying, if you've got an older version of 11i, the way Oracle stores responsibility has changed. But everything else between 11.5.10 and R12.0, 12.1 stays the same. If you are going to 12.2, Oracle has implemented WebLogic, and that's a significant change to the middleware application server layer. And compared to what's in previous versions, 12.2, you can log into WebLogic. So there's logins, there's authentication, you can set up authorizations. So we actually have another set of logging that we're going to recommend in the future for when you're doing WebLogic, OBIE, and those type of things.
Steve, the only thing I would add to that, if anything, just to confuse 12 with 12, would be maybe some comments you could go through with regard to release 12 of the database and what is possible with that, or shortly when that is certified.
Yeah, so everything that we've done is for the major certified versions for Oracle eBusiness Suite, looking at basically eBusiness Suite 12.1 running on an 11G R2 database, which probably the vast majority of everybody on the call is running. 12C of the Oracle database does have a major change to the underlying auditing engine, so they actually have unified auditing, which gives you a little bit better capabilities. And so if you are doing 12C, the recommendations in that area does change, and we're actually working through that. We've got 12C running in our test environments, but most people aren't running 12C yet. But that would be the only other major difference in terms of versions across different parts of the technology stack.
Next question. How can we set up a log to identify which OS username logged into Oracle EBS R12?
In terms of OS username would be hard. So the question basically wants to know is someone's logging in to the application, and how do I capture a little bit more information to know where that's coming from? And the two pieces of information you might have would be an OS username that they're authenticating locally on the Windows machine, and then also you can get their IP address. Because the way the web works, you don't want passing that user information around, so that actually doesn't get passed to the eBusiness Suite. So you do get an IP address, but Oracle eBusiness Suite doesn't capture that as part of the page access tracking anymore in R12. And that's one reason that we're then recommending you pick up the Apache logs to do that.
Steve, let me interrupt you. The question was actually two questions. It's similar to what Oracle databases can do when a user logs into Oracle database using Toad/SQL developer.
Yeah, so basically if anyone's used to looking at database audit logs, when you sign on directly to the database, not through the application, you can actually capture the OS username, which can also be spoofed from, it's not reliable information being passed from the client. You can't do anything similar with the eBusiness Suite. The best you can do is actually capture their IP address. But that is captured right now in two different log files. One of the features of our product app Defend, which runs on each application server, we actually capture that information and format that in a very usable way. So if you do have a very strong requirement to do that and want to correlate that information immediately, our product app Defend actually can do that. Because we capture the application sign-on username, and we also capture the IP information. And we can actually have hooks out to other systems and capture in real time other information if you need that.
Here's not a question, but a comment from one of the attendees. It says, need to remember to turn off auditing and or logging before patching.
Yeah, so that is somewhat of a concern. Some of our recommendations, we try to avoid too many audits in terms of object creation and major changes that are happening underlying in the database. So when you are doing patching, you are recompiling things, you're creating tables. And the application itself, so when you do a general ledger post, it will create temporary tables and do things like that. We have varying levels of how you should enable those, and that's typically when we work with the client. Most of the other recommendations are fairly straightforward, but when you're trying to create objects and audit the creation of objects and modification of objects, that can produce a lot of noise within the Oracle eBusiness Suite environment. So those are when we take the framework and kind of tweak it. What is the client actually looking for, and how is it best to solve that problem without generating a lot of noise, and how can you pick out the actual pieces? And a lot of times there we're actually looking at non-apps users who are doing those type of things, and we kind of tweak the actual audits to focus in a little bit closer to what you actually want to capture versus capturing every single time a table is created, because there's a lot of noise in eBusiness Suite for that.
Next question. Where/how to enable page access tracking? I don't see a profile. Where is this managed?
Yeah, so if you go through, the white paper clearly indicates it's within Oracle Applications Manager, the OAM piece, and you actually do it within that. And we actually have paths to that within the white paper and screenshots on how you do that. Page access tracking is not as well known. A lot of Oracle Applications DBAs don't know that feature exists, and it does capture similar to what sign-on audit level does for the web piece. And that was released, I think, in 11.5.9 or 11.5.10, so it is a little bit newer compared to like sign-on audit level. It's been around forever.
Next question. We purchased Oracle Audit Vault and wondered if we can use that to audit the Oracle eBusiness Suite.
So if we kind of take that question back one step and give a little bit of overview, and I'll kind of talk about it a little bit generically and then specifically. There's two sets of products on the market. There's specific Oracle database auditing tools, and our Oracle Audit Vault would be a tool like that. Other tools would be Guardium and Imperva. And those tools are very specifically meant to audit databases. Then there's another set of tools that are logging and logging solutions, and those are Splunk, HP ArcSight, RSA Envision, Q1 Radar. And those tools are meant to take in massive amounts of logs that are in very different formats. So they can take in database logs, Apache logs, syslog, network logs, firewall logs, all kinds of different logs, and correlate them. The problem with the database tools like Audit Vault is they're very specific to trying to audit SQL statements, and they don't do very well taking in other security events. Oracle Audit Vault can. It's called secured targets. They can take in Active Directory logs, Linux syslogs, but they're it's a little bit more of a rigid tool. Oracle Audit Vault definitely supports Oracle eBusiness Suite. It can use it has some packaged reports within it. It can actually do some of the end user tracking, so it can actually track what application user is executing a specific SQL statement. But in terms of some of the things that we're talking about here in the framework, we're looking at a lot of different types of logs that aren't necessarily supported in Oracle Audit Vault. So our recommendation is more looking at a generic logging solution that you can use at an enterprise level for things besides just Oracle databases like Splunk or ArcSight or Envision that can take in a large number of logs and also have very strong correlation capabilities.
Next part of that question is how can you track the Oracle eBusiness Suite individual user activity with the Oracle Audit Vault?
Yeah, so with the Oracle Audit Vault, also with the tools Imperva and Guardium, they all have the capability, which is very powerful. If you need to have this capability to take the end user, so let's say the sysadmin user signing on to the application, and they're doing things in the application that's generating SQL statements. Well, you're capturing those SQL statements. They also have the ability to tag those SQL statements with the application user. So you can say that instead of having the apps user, because what will happen is really every SQL statement executed by your Oracle eBusiness Suite is running as apps. So typically you'll see just the apps user executed the SQL statement. Well, that's for the end users coming in, that's for the batch processing, that's for the DBAs doing maintenance, doing patching. Everything's running as apps. So how do you know who actually did it? And those tools actually capture what's called client identifier, and they can take the client identifier, in this case, let's say sysadmin or whatever your application username is, and actually say that user actually executed these specific SQL statements. And that becomes very powerful, so you know what sysadmin did on a certain time. One problem, though, is when you're looking at the database auditing tools, they do capture SQL statements. So they're very powerful, and they can capture lots of SQL statements. But the problem is they capture SQL statements, because when you look at the actual SQL statements being captured, if I'm doing something, typically most of the tables have referential integrity. So I see that I updated profile option value 123456 and set site level 10,002 to value 3. It doesn't say that it was user sysadmin updated sign-on audit level to form. No, it says that user 0 updated profile option 123456 to value 3, and that's how it works. And so that's one of the limitations of using some of the database auditing tools, that they capture great information. If you need to capture that information, it's really one of the only ways to do it if you want to capture massive amounts of database audits. Where we're only recommending looking at security events in our framework. They work great, but they do have limitations, and you have to be very careful on how you design them.
Next question. Are there logs that can be used in EBS R12.1 to capture the IP address from where one EBS user logged in?
There is not a standard log that from 12.1 that will give you very clearly sysadmin used this IP address. Our App Defend product will do that because we just specifically designed that feature in because people were wanting it. But otherwise, you have to actually look through the Apache log. The Apache log will have it in different formats, and you have to parse all the different formats that it might come in as, because you actually have to capture the actual login page and know which parameters are being used for every possible login. But there is no standard way in 12.1 to get easily, like through page access tracking, what user signed in using what IP address. It worked in 11i, but that feature got disabled mostly within release 12.